This is the Active Church. To God be the glory.
Today is Father's Day 2017. And just 100 years ago, it was 1917. World War I was raging at that time, and it had been dragging on for 3 long years by then. Remember this, that when World War I began in 1914, everybody thought that it was going to be all done and dusted and over by Christmas of that year. However, it dragged on, and by 1917, all the nations were tired and they were running out of supplies. But then in 1917, we see 2 major changes taking place. Number one, the Emperor of Russia was forced to abdicate, and as a result of that, there was general chaos throughout the nation, total disaster. And consequently, the end result was that Russia dropped out of the war. The second important thing was that the USA entered the war at that time. And the net result of those 2 events in 1917 was that the war began to swing now in favor of the Allies. And by the end of 1918, Germany and her allies had to sue for peace. But as a result of World War I, major changes have taken place in human society. For the first time, up until then, it was like this. The mothers were left in the kitchen, but now, as a result of World War I, they had to move out into the workplace. And the reason was that most of the fathers then were fighting in the war. And so mothers had to replace their husbands in factories and shops. And so began the long battle for women's rights. The first movement probably was the suffragettes, who campaigned earnestly to get the vote for women. They succeeded eventually, and then they went on to get to the point where women were allowed to become members of parliament. And then, of course, over the last 50 years or so, we have seen now that women have become prime ministers and presidents of various countries. But as a result of the First World War, family life has been turned upside down, both for men and for women. And because today is Father's Day, we must never forget that all these changes that took place 100 years ago have had a tremendous impact on men. Their lives have truly been turned upside down. Up until then, up until 100 years ago, the father's place was as head of the house. He had to go out and to work in order to earn money to provide for the needs and the security of his family. The mother's place until then was in the kitchen and looking after her children. But as we've already emphasized, World War I changed all that. And in fact, the process was accelerated by World War II. To repeat, the consequence of all the unbelievable changes that have taken place in family life have happened in the last 100 years. And this means that both moms and dads are in serious trouble. Now, all of us here, we have been called by God to help one another, as we helped Ronald. And so therefore, instead of us following after what the world does all the time, and that is fighting with one another, we should get together and work out ways and means to solve our problems, and we can be sure that we need God's help for that if we are going to be successful. Because as we look at our society, as usual, women are bearing the brunt of it. There's a word that has suddenly come onto everybody's lips, and that is the word femicide. I couldn't find it in any standard dictionary, and therefore I had to look it up in Google. And Google defines femicide as being a sex-based hate crime, which operates as an intentional killing of females just because they are either women or girls. And then, of course, as we know only too well, unspeakable things happen to their bodies afterwards. And according to Google, there is one of these incidents on average taking place every 8 hours. Having said that, we as men know that we are in serious trouble as well, and we desperately need the help of you ladies. One of the things that I have become very much aware of in recent times is that husbands, whether they be in their 20s or in their middle years when they are carrying the heat and the burden of the day for their families, or in old age, that in all those cases, many wives tend to challenge the decisions of their husbands. Now, I want to say this immediately. Us guys are not exempt from that. We do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. So, some ladies even go so far as to watch their husbands like hawks, like a hawk, and they give them a tongue lashing at every possible moment. And of course, what happens then is that the flight or fight option comes about as a result of the adrenaline pumping in both parties. Now, we as men, as I've said, are not exempt from that either. But when you watch a bunch of guys, you will notice that they will stand there, and if one of them happens to say that he had a particular problem to solve in his life, and then he did whatever he did in order to overcome his problem. And as sure as nuts, there's going to be somebody in that bunch of guys that's going to say to him and chirp him and say to him, "Oh, I would have done that thing so much better." Now, then the fight or flight option comes into play as the adrenaline begins to pump on both sides of those guys. And at this point, I want to say to us as Christians, both men and women, that if we come across a person who we genuinely realize that this person is really very inexperienced, and therefore we know of a far better way in which to deal with their particular issue, that when we do that, we are totally gentle and sympathetic towards them. Above all, let us not belittle them in any way, nor let us do that, especially in a public place where other people hear what we are saying. That doesn't help anyone. And so we lead on to our conclusion. And let us all begin then, as people of Jesus, to train ourselves to be looking for what is best in one another and to grab hold of that and to build up and to strengthen it. Now, this is a very big ask for us. It's a very tall order, because given the fact that we live in a world which is so negative and so critical about everything and everybody, it is normal for us to get sucked into that kind of thing. And I just at this point want to say this to moms and dads. As you are aware of each other, be aware of your children as well. Notice when they come home excited about something that has happened to them. Take note of what it is. You might not have been able to share with them or anything like that because of your busy life. But when they come home and they're all over the moon about something, listen to what they are saying. It might merely be an emotion. We as adults do this as well. There are times when you and I go to some event and we get so excited and we put on fire. And then a few months down the line, we wonder now, what on earth were we getting excited about then? Because after all, it was all just in our emotions. When it's God speaking to us, be we young person or adult, that fire will not die deep down in our bellies. It won't die. It will continue to burn there. So, parents, don't only listen to each other as husband and wife, but listen to your children as well. And be aware that if there is something there inside of them, listen to what they are saying. And then begin to encourage them to look more and to experiment with what they believe God is saying to them. God will really bless you as a parent if you can learn to do that. And at this point, I want to publicly apologize to my 4 children for when I missed the boat with them completely over the years. The point is this, that I sometimes got carried away with a busy life and that kind of thing, but there were also times when I was an absolute clod. I just wasn't aware of what they are saying to me. So therefore, to all 4 of them, I say, I am sorry when I missed what you were feeling deep down in your heart and in your soul. However, if we as a church are going to make all the effort that we can to be good to one another and to look for the goodness in one another and then to build on that, let us remember that we are going to need God's help for that. We will not do it in our own strength. The devil will make jolly good sure that he bugs us all the time and gets onto our backs and so on, and he will break our best intentions. We've all proved that with our New Year's resolutions and all the rest of it. We have tried, and within a matter of days, we have all succeeded, because the devil makes sure that that is what's going to happen to us. But if as a church we are making an effort to look to one another and to build one another up, then let us realize that as we make this offering of our lives, a living sacrifice of our lives to God, He will help us, and Jesus will find in us a useful tool that He can use for His kingdom. And so in my mind's eye, I have a vision of active church being used of God because we have committed ourselves to Him, and He will use our offering, our live sacrifice and offering for His glory. And who knows where that will ultimately lead to. It could be across the whole of Christendom, all the denominations in the world that there are, that we as humble, active church will set the benchmark. We will be an example, and others will be used of the Lord to follow in our footsteps.
Before He came into the world, darkness reigned all over the place. Coming as a light, He took our sin, gave us His light, commanding us to shine. We are sons of light, piercing darkness with His bright light. So I'm gonna be